I am Victoria, 34 years old. Last night, I walked into my sister's lavish engagement party at a Manhattan luxury hotel. Her fiancé, a Wall Street fund manager, leaned over and loudly whispered to his friends that the stinky country girl had arrived. He told them to lock up the silver. I did not argue or defend my plain dress. I just took a sip of my sparkling water and smiled. He had no idea that I actually owned the very hotel he was standing in, or that the black credit card he just used to buy a $50,000 round of champagne was about to trigger a federal fraud investigation. Before I reveal exactly how I dismantled his fake empire, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you believe karma is a dish best served cold. The heavy mahogany doors of the Grand Sterling opened, and the scent of expensive cigars and imported lilies hit me instantly. This was Manhattan elite territory. My younger sister Chloe was celebrating her engagement to Julian, a junior portfolio manager at Vanguard Capital, who wore his ambition like a cheap cologne. I navigated the sea of tailored tuxedos and glittering evening gowns blending into the shadows of the grand ballroom. Julian spotted me near the ice sculpture. He nudged a group of his finance buddies, his voice carrying effortlessly over the string quartet. "The stinky country girl made it," Julian sneered, swirling a glass of amber liquid. "Make sure the valet checks her pockets before she leaves." Chloe stood right beside him, draped in a sequined gown, giggling as if he had just delivered a brilliant punchline. They looked me up and down, judging my unbranded minimalist navy dress. They assumed I was still drowning in agricultural debt running the rural farm our grandfather left behind. They perceived my lack of flashy logos as undeniable proof of my failure. I kept my expression entirely neutral. I did not mention that the fabric resting against my skin was hand-woven vicuña silk sourced from a private artisan in Milan. I certainly did not mention that the dirt-poor farm they constantly mocked had evolved into a $2 billion agricultural technology and eco-resort conglomerate. My company served as the primary supplier for the very caviar they were currently eating. I just let them enjoy their delusion. Julian wanted to solidify his status as the apex predator of the room. He snapped his fingers at the head sommelier. "Bring out 3 bottles of the 1996 Dom Perignon," Julian ordered, pulling a sleek metal credit card from his jacket. "Put it on my tab. Let us show my future sister-in-law what real success tastes like." The sommelier bowed and took the card. $50,000 swiped in a single heartbeat meant solely to humiliate me. I watched the waiter walk away to process the transaction. 5 seconds later, a distinct rhythmic vibration pulsed against my left wrist. I glanced down at my smartwatch. Because I secretly held the master deed to the Grand Sterling, my personal security network was integrated with the hotel payment gateway. The notification glowing on my small screen was not a standard receipt. The card Julian just used did not belong to a Vanguard Capital expense account. The routing data matched the primary retirement fund belonging to my parents Charles and Evelyn. And because the transaction exceeded the daily withdrawal limit of a senior citizen trust, it had instantly tripped an automated federal fraud flag. The trap had just armed itself, and Julian was holding the trigger. I watched the waiter disappear into the crowded ballroom, carrying the receipt that would soon drain my parents' retirement fund. Julian raised his crystal flute high into the air, basking in the applause of his finance colleagues. He stood there soaking up the unearned admiration, projecting the image of a fearless investment banker. I chose not to interrupt his performance. Exposing the credit card fraud right then would have caused a simple domestic dispute. I needed him to dig his grave much deeper. I took a slow sip of my water and turned away from the celebration. 10 minutes later, the suffocating heat of the gala prompted me to seek a moment of quiet. I navigated through the sea of guests and walked down the quiet, carpeted hallway toward the luxury lounge. The thick wooden door swung shut behind me, cutting off the loud music and the endless networking chatter. The space was a quiet sanctuary of polished mirrors and imported stone. I walked over to the gilded vanity and turned on the brass faucet, letting the cold water run over my wrists to ground my focus. The heavy door abruptly pushed open. The sharp clicking of designer heels echoed against the tile. It was my mother. Evelyn marched into the restroom, her posture rigid and her face set in a familiar mask of maternal disappointment. She bypassed the empty stalls and walked straight toward me, blocking my only path to the exit. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not compliment my dress or thank me for traveling to the city. She reached into her expensive leather clutch and pulled out a thick stack of folded legal documents. She threw the papers onto the wet marble counter right next to my hands. The pages slid slightly, stopping against the brass sink basin. I turned off the faucet and looked at the documents, then back at my mother. "Sign it, Victoria," she commanded, her tone leaving zero room for negotiation. Her eyes scanned my simple, unbranded dress with clear distaste. Julian is doing us a tremendous favor by marrying your sister. He is a rising star at Vanguard Capital, and he deserves a proper wedding gift from this family. Your father and I have decided that you will transfer the deed to the 50 acres of agricultural land your grandmother left you. Julian has a brilliant vision to develop a luxury commercial retail center on that property. It will elevate the family portfolio and finally put that useless patch of dirt to good use. I stared at her, letting the silence stretch across the cold room. For my entire life, Evelyn had viewed me as a stubborn disappointment because I preferred soil and crop yields over debutante balls and country club memberships. She despised the fact that my grandmother bypassed her and left the rural estate directly to me. She always treated my agricultural pursuits as a humiliating hobby. She had no idea that the useless patch of dirt was the founding asset of an eco-resort conglomerate currently dominating the national market. I picked up the stack of papers, keeping my expression entirely blank. What happens if I prefer to keep my land? I asked, testing the boundaries of her desperation. Evelyn crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. If you refuse to support your sister today, you will be formally removed from this family. Your father will cut you out of the will tomorrow morning. We will not tolerate your selfish behavior anymore. You will sign the deed transfer right now, or you can walk out of this hotel and never speak to us again. She was issuing a permanent ultimatum over a piece of property she deemed worthless. The disproportionate intensity of her threat triggered every analytical instinct I possessed. I did not argue. I simply unfolded the documents and began reading the fine print. Evelyn tapped her foot impatiently, clearly expecting me to skim the front page and blindly obey. She thought I was just an uneducated farmer intimidated by complex legal jargon. She failed to realize she was handing a binding contract to a corporate chief executive officer who spent her days dismantling hostile takeover bids. My eyes swept over the dense paragraphs, bypassing the standard transfer clauses and jumping straight to the recipient entity and the attached zoning addendums. The paperwork was not a simple domestic property transfer. Julian was not listed as the primary beneficiary. The receiving party was a shell company registered under a foreign holding trust. I recognized the corporate naming convention immediately. It was a subsidiary of a massive overseas mineral conglomerate known for aggressive resource extraction. I kept my breathing slow and rhythmic as the pieces of his puzzle snapped into perfect alignment. Julian had zero intention of building a commercial retail center on my land. He had circumvented standard real estate protocols and run deep geological surveys on the surrounding county sectors. The agricultural plot my grandmother left me sat directly above one of the largest untapped lithium deposits in the region. Julian had discovered the lithium. He knew the mineral rights alone were worth tens of millions of dollars. He was manipulating my mother into forcing a free land transfer so he could quietly sell the acreage to a foreign mining syndicate for a staggering personal payout. He planned to pocket the millions, pay off his mounting Wall Street debts, and leave my family with nothing but a fake story about a failed mall development. The sheer brazen greed of his strategy was almost impressive, but his execution was fundamentally flawed. He relied on the assumption that I would submit to my mother without reading the recipient clauses. He assumed my fear of family rejection would override my basic literacy. Evelyn leaned forward, tapping her manicured fingernail against the marble counter. Stop pretending to read the legal terms, Victoria. You do not understand how commercial development works. Julian is a financial expert. Just sign the bottom line so we can go back to the party. Chloe is waiting for us to make the announcement. I looked at my mother, feeling a profound sense of liberation. The final thread of daughterly obligations severed cleanly in my mind. She was willing to disown me to enrich a man she barely knew. She was actively facilitating the theft of my inheritance to buy social status for her golden child. You are right, Mother, I said, keeping my voice soft and defeated. I do not want to ruin Chloe's special night. Do you have a pen? Evelyn smiled, a victorious, satisfied smirk spreading across her face. She eagerly pulled a heavy silver fountain pen from her clutch and handed it to me. She believed her psychological intimidation had worked flawlessly. She thought she had just bullied her weak daughter into surrendering a multi-million-dollar asset. I took the silver pen and uncapped it. I placed the final page of the contract flat against the smooth marble surface. I did not write my actual legal signature. Years ago, during a highly sensitive corporate merger, my security team hired a forensic handwriting expert to train me in the exact mechanics of a duress signature. It is a highly specific, distinctively altered version of a person's handwriting, designed exclusively to be used when they are forced to sign fraudulent or extorted agreements. I gripped the pen, deliberately shifting my anchor point. I altered the sharp angle of the capital letter Vi in my first name, flattening the curve. I completely disconnected the fluid loop in the letter O and changed the pressure mapping on the final strokes. To the untrained eye of my mother, it looked like my standard cursive script. But to any certified forensic document examiner, it would be instantly classified as a blatant, legally provable forgery. I finished the signature and handed the pen back to Evelyn. I slid the paperwork across the wet counter. She snatched the documents eagerly, inspecting the blue ink on the dotted line. She let out a long breath of relief, her posture relaxing as she secured the stolen property inside her designer bag. "Try to look a little happier when you walk back out there, Victoria," she instructed, turning toward the restroom door. "We have guests from Vanguard Capital attending today. Do not embarrass your brother-in-law by looking so miserable." Evelyn walked out of the restroom, leaving me alone with the sound of the dripping brass faucet. I looked at my reflection in the mirror and allowed a cold, razor-sharp smile to finally touch my lips. Julian thought he had just secured a massive payday. He thought he had outsmarted a naive country girl and secured the mineral rights to a lithium fortune. He had no idea that by attempting to process that specific piece of paper, he had just triggered his own destruction. When he submitted that altered signature to the foreign mineral conglomerate across state and international lines, he would instantly commit federal property fraud and interstate wire fraud. He did not extract an asset, he just accepted a ticking time bomb. I dried my hands, smoothed the silk of my dress, and prepared to return to the ballroom. The hunt was officially underway. The grand ballroom buzzed with the hollow energy of people desperately trying to prove their net worth. I slipped back into the crowd, keeping a calculated distance from the center of the room. My father Charles stood near an imposing ice sculpture holding court with a circle of local politicians and mid-tier real estate investors. He gripped a heavy glass of scotch, swirling the amber liquid, while his loud, booming voice carried effortlessly over the string quartet playing in the background. He clapped Julian on the back, practically presenting the groom like a prized racehorse at an auction. Charles puffed out his chest, detailing Julian's recent promotion at Vanguard Capital with unearned pride. He boasted about his future son-in-law managing $100 million portfolios, spinning a narrative of immense financial dominance intended to impress the room. The investors nodded politely, exchanging premium business cards and treating Julian like a rising star in the financial district. Julian soaked up the adoration, adjusting his expensive silk tie and offering empty platitudes about high-yield market strategies. They were a perfect match, a father desperate for a legacy to brag about and a fraudster eager to exploit that exact vulnerability. The heavy entrance doors swung open and the atmosphere near the back of the hall subtly shifted. Marcus walked into the venue. My older sister Maya trailed slightly behind him, looking exhausted by the mere thought of interacting with our parents. Marcus wore a flawlessly tailored dark charcoal suit that emphasized his imposing physical presence. As an African-American man with a brilliant analytical mind, he commanded the space without needing to raise his voice or demand attention. He surveyed the room with the quiet clinical detachment of a seasoned predator scanning a field of wounded prey. Our family had always treated Marcus like an unwanted burden. When Maya married him 5 years ago, Charles and Evelyn nearly boycotted the ceremony. They assumed Marcus was just another unpolished outsider, a low-level government worker who lacked the pedigree and trust funds they demanded from their inner circle. They frequently excluded him from holiday dinners and openly mocked his modest civil service salary whenever he left the room. Their prejudice and blinding ignorance shielded them from the truth. They had no idea that Marcus did not fetch coffee for local bureaucrats. He was a senior investigative counsel for the Securities and Exchange Commission. He spent his days dismantling corrupt hedge funds, seizing offshore assets, and sending arrogant Wall Street executives to federal penitentiaries. He was the apex predator of the financial sector. Marcus bypassed the greeting line entirely. He ignored the cold glares from my mother and the dismissive wave from my father. His dark eyes locked onto me, standing in the shadows of a towering floral arrangement. He moved with silent purpose, lifting 2 crystal flutes of champagne from a passing waiter's tray before closing the distance between us. He handed me a glass, his posture relaxed but his gaze razor-sharp. We clinked our glasses together, a silent toast to the impending slaughter. He took a slow sip of his drink and leaned in close. His voice was a low, steady rumble, barely audible over the chaotic chatter of the party guests. "He took the bait," Marcus whispered, keeping his eyes fixed on Julian across the room. The initial credit card transaction triggered the federal banking alert just like you predicted. I ran a shadow trace on his primary accounts. He used a classic layering technique, bouncing the capital through 3 separate Delaware holding companies before pushing it offshore. A standard bank auditor would lose the trail in hours, but my team mapped the entire sequence in real time. 10 minutes after your mother walked out of the restroom holding that forged property deed, Julian initiated a secondary transfer. He routed $2.5 million out of Vanguard Capital client reserves. The funds just cleared a shell entity in the Cayman Islands. I gripped the stem of my champagne flute, digesting the clinical perfection of the trap. Julian was accelerating his timeline. He was using the stolen retirement funds and the fake land deed to leverage a larger corporate theft, attempting to cover his mounting gambling debts before Monday morning. The sheer velocity of his crimes meant the Securities and Exchange Commission now had ironclad jurisdiction over his entire life. The snare was tightening, and Julian was eagerly wrapping the wire around his own neck. Wire fraud, embezzlement of client funds, and interstate property theft, I murmured, watching Julian laugh at a joke my father made. He is checking off every box on a federal prosecutor's wish list. He thinks the deed gives him the collateral he needs to satisfy his offshore creditors. He is bridging the gap with client money, assuming he can replace it once the lithium rights are sold. Marcus nodded, pulling a sleek, encrypted smartphone from his pocket. The problem for Julian is that the deed is a fraudulent document securing a non-existent transaction. When Vanguard Capital audits their reserves on Monday, they will find a severe deficit. We just need to link the Cayman routing numbers directly to his personal devices to secure the federal indictment. Across the ballroom, Julian noticed our quiet interaction. His fragile ego could not tolerate anyone else holding my attention even for a fleeting moment. He excused himself from the circle of investors and swaggered toward our secluded corner. His face was flushed from expensive liquor and the intoxicating high of his recent successful deception. He approached us with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he owned the very floor he walked on. He looked at me, offering a condescending smirk before shifting his gaze to Marcus. Julian did not see a brilliant federal investigator. His ingrained prejudice and superficial worldview only allowed him to see a black man standing near a tray of drinks. Julian snapped his fingers in the air, a sharp, disrespectful sound designed to demean and provoke. "Hey, buddy," Julian slurred slightly, waving his empty crystal flute. "Grab me a fresh drink and fetch some extra cocktail napkins. Someone spilled red wine near the gift table, and you people need to clean it up before it ruins the marble." The racist microaggression hung in the air, heavy and vile. A lesser man would have lost his temper. A lesser man would have grabbed Julian by the lapels of his custom suit and thrown him across the room. But Marcus operated on a much higher frequency. He thrived in high-stakes interrogations where patience yielded the most devastating convictions. He understood that engaging in a petty argument with a drunk fraudster was a waste of precious leverage. The goal was not to win a verbal sparring match. The goal was to secure the digital evidence required to lock Julian in a concrete cell for the next 20 years. Marcus did not flinch. He did not correct the arrogant groom or demand an apology for the blatant disrespect. A slow, chilling smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated danger that went unnoticed by the drunken target. "Right away, sir," Marcus replied, his tone smooth and accommodating. Marcus reached into the breast pocket of his tailored jacket. He did not pull out a standard paper napkin. He retrieved a crisp white square of fabric and extended his hand, offering it to Julian. Julian snatched the fabric without a word of thanks, crumpling it carelessly and shoving it deep into his own jacket pocket right next to his sleek mobile phone. He turned his back on us, marching away to rejoin his wealthy audience. I watched Julian walk away, feeling a rush of cold adrenaline. To the naked eye, Marcus had simply handed him a piece of cloth. But Julian failed to realize that the fabric was embedded with a microscopic radio frequency identification mesh. It functioned as a digital parasite, siphoning biometric passkeys and unlocking the secondary secure folders Julian assumed were hidden. The moment Julian shoved that fabric against his phone, the hidden technology bypassed his commercial encryption. Marcus looked down at his own smartwatch. A green progress bar illuminated the dark screen. The silent, invisible download had commenced. The device was actively cloning every text message, every hidden offshore routing number, and every encrypted email directly from Julian's pocket. The architect of my sister's fake wedding had just carried his own federal indictment straight to the dance floor. The crystal chandelier dimmed as a solitary spotlight illuminated the center stage. Julian stepped up to the microphone, holding his fresh glass of champagne. He flashed a brilliant white smile to the audience of Wall Street executives and wealthy socialites. His voice echoed through the high vaulted ceilings of the ballroom, delivering a rehearsed monologue about the sacred bonds of trust. He spoke about family values and the profound loyalty required to build a lasting legacy together. He painted himself as a devoted partner ready to protect my sister and honor my parents. From our secluded vantage point behind a row of draped velvet curtains, Marcus and I watched the theatrical performance. The contrast between the heartfelt words spoken under the spotlight and the digital reality unfolding in our hands was stark. The green progress bar on Marcus's wrist had vanished, replaced by a solid checkmark. The radio frequency mesh hidden inside the napkin had successfully mirrored the entire contents of Julian's mobile device. Marcus pulled a sleek black tablet from his interior jacket pocket and initiated the secure handshake protocol to receive the stolen data payload. The screen flared to life, casting a pale blue glow across our faces. We did not need to sift through irrelevant photographs or mundane calendar appointments. Marcus deployed an extraction algorithm designed by federal cybercrime units to bypass superficial applications and target hidden financial ledgers and encrypted communication vaults. The software categorized the downloaded files into distinct folders within seconds. I watched Julian raise his glass to toast my parents, while Marcus tapped the first folder labeled with a sequence of offshore routing numbers. The sheer volume of the transaction logs was staggering. Julian had not simply drained my parents' retirement accounts to fund a lavish engagement party. That initial theft was merely the tip of a much deeper rot. The spreadsheets revealed a sophisticated layering technique. He had filtered the stolen retirement capital through a newly formed limited liability company registered in Delaware. I leaned closer to the screen, studying the incorporation documents attached to the shell entity. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the name listed as the sole managing director. It was Chloe. Julian had registered the fraudulent company using my sister's legal identity and social security number. He was establishing a financial structure that placed all federal liability squarely on her shoulders. If the authorities ever audited the accounts, she would be the one facing decades in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud while he walked away clean. But the money flowing into the shell company did not stop with my parents' stolen retirement funds. Marcus ran a rapid cross-reference on the incoming wire transfers. The screen populated with deposits originating from untraceable cryptocurrency wallets and dummy corporations based in the Cayman Islands. These were not legitimate investment returns. The deposit patterns matched the exact signature of underground sports betting syndicates and illicit gambling brokers. Julian was washing dirty money for criminal organizations. He was using his upcoming marriage into a respectable family as the ultimate camouflage to legitimize illicit cash flow. I felt a cold wave of disgust wash over me. I had always assumed Chloe was just a naive girl blinded by the allure of designer handbags and luxury vacations. I thought Julian was manipulating her, treating her like a convenient prop to secure his status. I believed she was a victim of his charm, unaware of the devastating legal jeopardy he was placing her in. The reality proved to be infinitely darker. Marcus backed out of the financial ledgers and opened a folder containing decrypted chat logs from a secure messaging application. The conversation thread was between Julian and a user operating under a solitary initial. The context clues and reference dates immediately confirmed the second participant was Chloe. My eyes scanned the text exchanges, expecting to find her complaining about wedding arrangements or demanding more expensive jewelry. Instead, I found a coordinated conspiracy that chilled my blood. The messages dated back 3 months. Chloe was not a victim. She was the primary architect of my impending destruction. I read a long paragraph she had sent to Julian detailing my intense allergy to a specific chemical derivative found in certain pain medications. She outlined the exact severe reaction it would trigger: a sudden drop in blood pressure, respiratory failure, and immediate anaphylactic shock. The subsequent messages detailed a calculated timeline. Chloe explicitly instructed Julian to acquire the untraceable chemical compound and slip it into my wine during the upcoming wedding reception. They treated my murder like a mere logistical hurdle. Chloe wrote that a public medical emergency would create the perfect chaotic distraction. While the paramedics rushed me to the intensive care unit, she and my parents would step in as my immediate next of kin. She knew I had not updated my medical directives to include a secondary proxy. By inducing a coma, they planned to petition a state judge for emergency medical and financial guardianship. Chloe bragged in the chat log about how easily she could convince our parents to support her petition, citing my sudden tragic incapacity. Once she secured the legal authority, she planned to transfer my entire estate and my corporate holdings directly into the shell company Julian had established. They were orchestrating an assassination disguised as an allergic reaction simply to steal my wealth. I stared at the glowing screen, absorbing the sheer depravity of my own flesh and blood. The sister I had protected during our childhood, the girl who had smiled at me just 20 minutes ago in the restroom, was actively counting down the days until she could watch me suffocate on a ballroom floor. She was willing to extinguish my life to fund her shopping habits. I did not shed a tear. The final remaining tether of familial obligation severed cleanly and quietly in my mind. The girl on the stage was no longer my sister. She was a hostile threat requiring immediate neutralization. Marcus placed a steadying hand on my shoulder, recognizing the silent shift in my posture. He did not offer useless sympathy. He simply swiped the screen to reveal the final decrypted folder. "We have the motive and the means," Marcus whispered, his voice a steady grounding force. "Now look at the endgame." He tapped an email chain downloaded directly from the internal servers of Vanguard Capital. The subject line was flagged as high priority and addressed to the senior executive board of the investment firm. Julian had submitted a comprehensive dossier outlining a proposed corporate acquisition. I leaned in to read the executive summary. The target of the acquisition was a rapidly expanding agricultural technology and eco-resort conglomerate, my conglomerate. The breath left my lungs as I read through his meticulous operational plan. Julian was not satisfied with merely stealing my personal assets through a fabricated medical emergency. He intended to leverage his position at Vanguard Capital to launch a hostile takeover of my entire corporate empire. The report detailed a strategy to buy up controlling shares through a network of anonymous proxies, using the laundered money from his gambling associates and the anticipated capital from selling the lithium rights on my grandmother's land. He had mapped out the exact vulnerabilities in my supply chain. He planned to force a sudden devaluation of my company stock by triggering a coordinated media smear campaign right after my scheduled medical collapse. Once the stock plummeted, Vanguard Capital would swoop in and acquire the majority shares for a fraction of their true market value. Julian promised his senior partners a historic return on investment, elevating himself to a partner position while simultaneously gutting everything I had built over the last decade. The sheer scale of his ambition was breathtaking. He intended to use my land, my money, and my very life to crown himself the king of the financial district. He thought he was a mastermind playing a flawless game of chess against a woman he viewed as a simple rural farmer. He held all the winning pieces. He had no idea he had just handed his entire playbook to the very person holding the match to burn his board to ashes. I looked away from the tablet and stared across the room at Julian. He was finishing his speech, raising his glass to deafening applause. Chloe stood beside him, beaming with a radiant manufactured joy. They thought they were untouchable. They thought the future belonged entirely to them. I turned back to Marcus, feeling the cold steel of resolve harden in my chest. The rules of engagement had just changed. It was time to show them what a hostile takeover truly looked like. Marcus looked at me, waiting for the order to involve local law enforcement. I shook my head slowly. Calling the police right now would only result in a chaotic domestic disturbance at a high society event. Julian would hire expensive defense attorneys, claim his phone was hacked, and bury the evidence in endless litigation. I needed him to commit the corporate felony in broad daylight. I needed Vanguard Capital to swallow the poison bait entirely. I pulled my own encrypted tablet from my designer clutch. If Julian wanted to launch a hostile takeover using stolen data, I was going to gladly provide the exact leverage he needed. I accessed my corporate secure server and isolated a decoy directory. In the cybersecurity industry, we call this a honeypot. It was a simulated, mirrored version of my conglomerate's source code and financial algorithms. It looked incredibly authentic, but contained catastrophic structural flaws and a dormant tracking beacon. I drafted an anonymous email addressed directly to the Senior Risk Assessment Department at Vanguard Capital, attaching the decoy files. I added a brief message implying the data was leaked by a disgruntled former employee seeking a payout. I hit send. The moment Vanguard analysts opened those files to evaluate the proposed acquisition, they would technically be receiving stolen corporate property across state lines. The tracking beacon would embed itself in their network, logging every executive who viewed the illicit data. Julian was no longer just a rogue employee executing a domestic theft. He was about to make his entire financial firm complicit in federal corporate espionage. I tucked the tablet away just as the crowd near the open bar parted. Chloe was marching toward my secluded corner. She held a brimming glass of dark red wine, swaying her hips with the exaggerated confidence of a woman who believed she had secured a lifetime of limitless wealth. Several society wives trailed behind her, eager to witness whatever social drama the bride-to-be was about to instigate. Chloe stopped directly in front of me. She looked me up and down, her lips curling into a cruel, predatory sneer. She stepped closer, pretending to stumble on the hem of her own sequined gown. Her hand jerked forward, causing the dark red wine to splash heavily across the bodice of my unbranded navy dress. The cold liquid soaked instantly into the expensive hand-woven vicuña silk, leaving a jagged stain over my chest. The surrounding guests gasped, falling totally silent. Chloe did not apologize. She let out a loud, theatrical laugh that echoed through the quiet room. "Oh, look at that!" Chloe announced, her voice raised to ensure maximum public humiliation. "I guess red really is not your color, Victoria. But then again, nothing in this room is your color. You look like a depressed farmhand who got lost on the way to a high society gathering. You really should have stayed in the country. You are bringing down the entire aesthetic of my engagement party." I remained perfectly still. I did not reach for a napkin to wipe the stain. I maintained steady, unbroken eye contact with the girl who had just finalized a plot to induce my respiratory failure. "You seem stressed, Chloe," I replied, my tone flat and unbothered. "Are the wedding preparations becoming too expensive for your new fiancé?" Her fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second. She hated being challenged in public, especially in front of the wealthy elite she was trying so hard to impress. She crossed her arms, thrusting her chin upward. "Actually, since you brought up expenses," Chloe demanded, gesturing toward the towering floral archways decorating the ballroom. "The floral designer just presented the final invoice for tonight. It is $20,000. Julian and I have already paid for the champagne and the catering. Since you showed up here empty-handed, looking like a pathetic single spinster, the least you can do is contribute to your younger sister's happiness. Pay the florist right now." The society wives exchanged expectant glances, waiting for me to break down in tears or flee the hotel in shame. They expected the poor rural sister to crumble under the astronomical financial demand. They thought I would beg for forgiveness or offer a meager compromise. I did not blink. I reached into my clutch and retrieved a solid metal credit card. It was matte black, devoid of any bank logos, and carried no embossed name on the front. I held it out toward her. Chloe snatched the heavy metal card from my fingers, her eyes lighting up with greedy triumph. She snapped her fingers at a nearby event coordinator, demanding a mobile payment terminal. The coordinator rushed over, holding a sleek digital point-of-sale device. Chloe swiped the black metal through the card reader herself, punching in the $20,000 charge with her manicured fingers. The machine processed the request for 2 seconds before chiming a successful approval. A long paper receipt spooled out of the top. Chloe tore the receipt from the machine and tossed the black card back onto the small cocktail table next to my arm. She offered a smug, victorious smirk, believing she had just extorted a massive sum of money and asserted her dominance over my pathetic life. She turned her back on me and walked away, laughing with her friends, waving the receipt like a trophy. I picked up the metal card and slipped it back into my purse. Marcus stepped out from the shadows of the velvet curtains, his dark eyes tracking my sister's retreating figure. He adjusted his suit jacket, a low rumble of dark amusement escaping his chest. "She took the bait," Marcus noted, his voice clinical and detached. "She swallowed the hook," I corrected, smoothing the ruined silk of my dress. Chloe thought she had humiliated me in front of the Manhattan elite. She had no idea that the specific black card she just processed was not linked to a standard checking account. It was a dedicated honeypot ledger tethered directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Internal Revenue Service. Every single dollar routed through that card carried a federal tracking tag designed to map illicit cash flows for ongoing government sting operations. By processing her engagement party floral invoice using those specific monitored funds, Chloe had just officially converted her own wedding expenses into physical evidence of federal money laundering. She had actively commingled clean vendor payments with targeted government bait. The trap was locked, and the countdown to her arrest had officially begun. I wiped a stray drop of ruined red wine from my collar and gestured for Marcus to follow me. We bypassed the main ballroom doors and slipped into a narrow service corridor meant only for senior hotel staff. The music faded behind the thick acoustic paneling. We walked in silence until we reached a reinforced steel door marked as a utility closet. I pressed my thumb against the biometric scanner concealed beneath a blank metal plate. The heavy locking mechanism disengaged with a deep metallic clunk. We stepped into the central security nervous system of the Grand Sterling. A wall of high-definition monitors glowed in the dark room, tracking every single hallway exit and private alcove of the building. The hotel security chief stood up, immediately adjusting his posture to offer a respectful nod. He knew exactly who signed his paychecks. I waved him away, instructing him to take an early coffee break. The chief left the room without a single question, leaving Marcus and me alone with the glowing screens. Marcus plugged his encrypted tablet into the main terminal, linking the hotel closed-circuit feeds directly to his federal database. We did not have to wait long for the next phase of the trap to trigger. My eyes scanned the grid of monitors until I spotted a familiar figure moving away from the celebration. Julian was marching down the third-floor eastern corridor, far away from the prying eyes of his future in-laws and his Wall Street peers. He was checking his phone nervously, loosening his silk tie as he paced the empty hallway. He thought he had found a private corner to manage a sudden crisis. He had no idea he was standing in the exact center of my surveillance net. A woman stepped out from an adjacent service elevator, blocking Julian's path. She wore the crisp, black, tailored suit and subtle earpiece of the hotel event coordination staff. She held a clipboard against her chest, projecting the image of a busy employee, ensuring the party ran smoothly. Her posture was entirely wrong for a subordinate addressing a wealthy guest. She stood too close, invading his personal space. Julian recoiled, initially looking around to ensure the corridor remained deserted. When he realized they were alone, his demeanor shifted from irritation to raw panic. He grabbed her elbow, attempting to pull her toward a recessed alcove near the ice machines. The woman did not resist, but she maintained a cold, unyielding stance. Marcus tapped his tablet, isolating the audio feed from the hidden microphone mounted inside the nearest smoke detector. The static cleared instantly, bringing their hushed conversation directly into the control room. "What are you doing here?" Julian hissed, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "I told you never to approach me when I'm with her family. You are going to ruin everything." The event coordinator did not flinch. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed clearly through our speakers. "I do not care about your fake little family gathering, Julian," the woman replied, her tone devoid of any customer service polish. "I care about the timeline you keep pushing back. You promised me the money last month. You told me the Vanguard bonuses were clearing. Now you are parading around out there swiping credit cards for $50,000 champagne towers while I am sitting here with empty pockets. I am done waiting." Julian ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair, his facade of the master investor cracking under the pressure. "Keep your voice down," he pleaded, glancing at the corridor camera he wrongly assumed was merely recording video. "The bonuses were delayed, the market shifted. You know how these portfolios work. I just need a few more days." The woman stepped closer, leaning into his space. She tapped her manicured fingernail against her clipboard. "You do not have a few more days, Julian. You have until Friday. $100,000 wired into the account I gave you. If that money does not hit my ledger by noon, I am going to hit send on an email I drafted this morning. It contains the video we recorded at the plaza last month. I am sending it to your sweet little fiancé, her arrogant parents, and every senior partner at Vanguard Capital." Julian's face turned a sickly shade of gray. The threat of public exposure paralyzed him. A leaked affair would not just end his engagement to Chloe. It would trigger a moral turpitude clause in his Vanguard employment contract, resulting in immediate termination. His entire house of cards would collapse before he could finalize the hostile takeover of my company. He raised his hands in a frantic gesture of surrender. "Okay," he breathed, his voice shaking with fear. "Okay, Friday, you will get the 100,000, but you have to delete the video. I swear I will get the cash." "Where exactly is a junior portfolio manager drowning in debt going to pull 100 grand from in 4 days? The woman challenged, crossing her arms. "You are leveraged up to your neck." Julian let out a dark, desperate scoff. His eyes hardened as his survival instincts kicked in. "I have it covered," he muttered, stepping closer to her. "My stupid sister-in-law just signed over the rights to 50 acres of prime real estate. She thinks she is gifting us a mall development. The dumb farm girl has no idea what that land is actually worth. I am draining her trust fund first thing Monday morning. I will siphon the cash through the new shell company and pay you off. Just keep your mouth shut until Friday." Julian did not wait for her reply. He turned on his heel and practically sprinted back toward the main ballroom, eager to return to his wealthy audience before anyone noticed his absence. The woman remained standing in the quiet hallway. She watched him disappear around the corner, her expression remarkably calm for someone who had just threatened to blackmail a Wall Street executive. Inside the control room, I stared at the monitor, digesting the words Julian had just spoken. He had openly confessed to his plan to steal my assets to pay off his mistress. He had laid out the timeline, the target, and the motive in a single, unbroken monologue. I looked over at Marcus, expecting him to start drafting a report. Instead, my brother-in-law was smiling. It was a slow, terrifying grin that sent a chill through the air. Marcus did not reach for a notepad. He reached for his encrypted tablet and typed a brief sequence of commands. On the security monitor, the event coordinator raised her hand to her ear. She removed the subtle earpiece she had been wearing and spoke clearly into the hidden microphone pinned beneath her lapels. "Target acquired," she stated, her voice projecting crisp and metallic through our control room speakers. "Audio recording is pristine. Extortion parameters met." Marcus tapped the screen, confirming the secure upload. He turned to me, the light from the monitors reflecting in his dark eyes. "I hired her 3 months ago," Marcus said, his tone ringing with lethal satisfaction. "When I first suspected Julian was shuffling illicit funds, I needed eyes inside his daily routine. She is not a rogue mistress looking for a payday Victoria. She is an undercover forensic auditor working directly for my task force. We fabricated the affair narrative to test his financial desperation." I watched the screen as the auditor smoothed her blazer and walked calmly toward the staff elevator. Julian thought he was negotiating a dirty secret with a greedy lover. He had no idea he was speaking directly to the federal government. By promising to drain my trust fund to pay a blackmail demand, he had officially elevated his corporate sins. The audio file we just captured did not just prove infidelity. It provided the exact legal foundation required to charge him with conspiracy to commit extortion and premeditated wire fraud. The hunt was no longer a theoretical game. The trap had closed. 2 days later, the suffocating atmosphere of my parents' Upper East Side dining room felt like a physical weight pressing against my shoulders. Crystal wine glasses clinked together under the soft glow of a vintage chandelier. Charles sat at the head of the long mahogany table, carving into a rare filet mignon. He raised his glass of imported Bordeaux toward Julian. My father was hosting this lavish dinner to celebrate what he believed was a masterstroke of financial genius. He thought his future son-in-law had just secured a highly lucrative commercial real estate deal on my supposedly barren 50 acres of farmland. He had no idea he was toasting to his own impending ruin. Julian sat next to Chloe, soaking in the praise. He wore a smug, satisfied smirk, swirling his wine and offering modest shrugs that fooled no one. Chloe rested her hand on his arm, flashing a new diamond tennis bracelet she undoubtedly purchased using funds siphoned from the fraudulent shell company. They looked like royalty presiding over a conquered territory. I sat quietly at the opposite end of the table, focusing my attention on slicing my steak. My silence only seemed to agitate my father further. Charles set his silver knife down with a sharp, grating scrape against the porcelain plate. He stared at me from across the table, his eyes narrowing with deep resentment. "You could at least pretend to show some enthusiasm, Victoria," my father commanded, his voice carrying a harsh reprimand. "Julian is elevating this entire family to a new tax bracket. He just secured a development deal that will guarantee our legacy. Meanwhile, you are still dragging your feet over that pathetic little studio apartment you rent downtown. I told you 3 weeks ago to sell that cramped space and give the liquid cash to Julian so he can roll it into a high-yield portfolio." Evelyn did not even bother to look up from her roasted asparagus. She took a delicate sip of her water and let out a long, performative sigh. "Your sister is too stubborn to recognize a golden opportunity." Charles, my father remarked, his tone dripping with casual disdain. "She prefers to live like a peasant. It is a disgrace to this family name. Look at Chloe. She is marrying a visionary. She understands how to build wealth. You, on the other hand, cling to that failing dirt farm and refuse to let the men in this room help you. You have always been a profound embarrassment to our social circle." I kept my posture relaxed. Years ago, those words would have felt like a knife twisting in my ribs. I would have argued, defended my career, and tried desperately to prove my worth to people incapable of respecting me. Tonight, their insults sounded like the desperate buzzing of trapped insects. I knew the truth. That pathetic little apartment was actually a $70 million luxury penthouse overlooking Central Park. The failing dirt farm was a global agricultural technology empire. I did not need to defend my kingdom to peasants pretending to be kings. I swallowed my bite of food and set my silverware down neatly. I looked up, meeting my father's gaze with wide, compliant eyes. I allowed a soft, defeated sigh to escape my lips, modeling the exact behavior of a broken, submissive daughter yielding to parental pressure. "You are right, Dad," I said, keeping my voice quiet and deferential. "I have been holding on to things out of foolish pride. I do not understand the markets the way Julian does. I am just struggling to keep my head above water with the farm maintenance." The sudden shift in my demeanor caused a ripple of surprise around the table. Charles blinked, his aggressive posture faltering for a fraction of a second before swelling into puffed-out triumph. He glanced at Julian, nodding as if he had single-handedly wrestled a wild animal into submission. Evelyn finally looked at me, a cruel, victorious gleam illuminating her features. I turned my attention directly to Julian. He was leaning forward, his dark eyes shining with unchecked predatory greed. "Julian," I said, softening my tone to sound naive and overwhelmed, "if you really think you can generate better returns, I want you to handle my accounts. I should not be managing my own money anymore. I will sell the apartment. I will transfer whatever small savings I have left. I want to sign over total control of my personal finances to you. Let you invest on my behalf just like you do for your Vanguard clients." Julian's jaw practically unhinged. He tried to maintain a mask of calm professionalism, but the sheer intoxicating thrill of an easy payday bled through his pores. He was a desperate man drowning in hidden gambling debts and facing a ticking clock from his underground creditors. I had just offered him a fresh, unmonitored revenue stream on a silver platter. He assumed my life savings amounted to maybe $100,000. He planned to drain it by midnight to cover his tracks. He did not hesitate. Julian reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a tri-folded legal document. He had brought it to dinner planning to coerce me into signing it later through intimidation. My sudden surrender saved him the effort. He smoothed the paper out and slid it across the polished mahogany table until it stopped right next to my wine glass. "It is the smart move, Victoria," Julian stated, his voice slick with false reassurance. "I have a dedicated fiduciary team that can optimize your assets. This is just a standard power of attorney. It gives me the legal authority to act as your financial proxy. It authorizes me to execute trades, consolidate your banking profiles, and manage your real estate holdings. Just sign the bottom line, and I will take the burden off your shoulders." Chloe clapped her hands together, leaning her head against Julian's shoulder. "See, Victoria," she chimed in, her tone patronizing and sweet. "Family looks out for family. Julian is going to save you from your own incompetence." I picked up the heavy brass pen resting near my plate. I looked at the power of attorney document. Granting a known fraudster unrestricted access to my financial identity was a terrifying concept for an ordinary citizen. But I was not an ordinary citizen. My true assets were locked behind a blind trust fortified by layers of corporate shell entities and biometric encryption. The only account tied directly to my public social security number was a localized honeypot ledger I had intentionally seeded with $50,000. I uncapped the pen. I pressed the dark ink against the dotted line and signed my name. I did not use the duress signature this time. I used my genuine, legally binding script. I wanted this contract verified by any court in the state. I wanted Julian to legally tether himself to my digital footprint, because the moment he used this document to access that specific honeypot account, my security architecture would initiate a reverse trace routing his IP address straight to the federal task force Marcus had assembled. I capped the pen and pushed the signed document back across the table. Julian snatched it up with lightning speed. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it securely into his breast pocket, patting the fabric with a deep sigh of relief. He thought he had just won the lottery. He thought he had secured the lifeline he needed to survive the impending audit at Vanguard Capital. The ink on the page had barely dried when a sharp, piercing sound shattered the quiet hum of the dining room. The heavy brass doorbell at the front of the estate rang. It did not chime politely. It echoed through the grand hallway with a prolonged, urgent buzzing indicating someone was leaning heavily against the button. Charles frowned, tossing his linen napkin onto the table. "Who on earth is ringing the bell at this hour?" he grumbled, pushing his chair back. "We are not expecting anyone else." Evelyn waved her hand toward the kitchen entrance. "Let the housekeeper get it, Charles. Sit down and finish your wine." But the heavy footsteps echoing from the foyer did not belong to the housekeeper. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a nondescript gray suit and holding a thick leather-bound portfolio strode directly into the dining room. He bypassed the formal greeting area, ignoring the frantic protests of our domestic staff trailing behind him. He moved with the rigid, uncompromising authority of a man executing a legal mandate. The stranger stopped at the edge of the mahogany table. His eyes swept over the seated family members, bypassing my parents and zeroing in on the groom-to-be. "Julian Hayes," the man asked, his voice flat and devoid of any polite inflection. Julian froze. His hand halted midway to his wineglass. The color drained from his face, leaving a sickly pale hue. "Yes," he stammered, his confident swagger evaporating instantly. "Who are you? How did you get in here?" The man did not answer the question. He simply raised the thick leather-bound portfolio and tossed it squarely onto the center of the dining table. The heavy stack of documents hit the polished wood with a loud, resounding thud that rattled the crystal glassware. "You have been served," the man stated, turning on his heel and walking out of the room just as swiftly as he had entered. The dining room descended into a suffocating, deathly silence. Charles stared at the documents, his face twisting in confusion. Chloe leaned forward, her brow furrowed. Julian's hands shook as he reached out to peel back the cover page of the portfolio. The bold black lettering stamped across the top of the official document glared under the chandelier light. It was not a civil lawsuit. It was not a standard court summons. It was a formal margin call issued directly by a premier international investment bank. The legal text outlined a catastrophic deficit in a highly leveraged margin account tied to his personal trading profile. The bank was executing an emergency demand for immediate capital injection to cover failing short positions. Julian stared at the bottom line. The bold red numbers dictated the terms of his survival. He owed exactly $4 million, and the document explicitly stated the funds must be wired into the institutional holding account within 24 hours, or the bank would initiate aggressive asset seizure protocols. The dining room felt devoid of oxygen. The formal celebration had transformed into a crime scene in a matter of seconds. The heavy leather-bound portfolio sat in the center of the table, radiating undeniable doom. Charles could not contain his panic. He abandoned his posture of the dignified patriarch. He reached across the mahogany table, snatching the document before Julian could even formulate a coherent response. My father flipped past the cover sheet. His eyes scanned the dense legal text detailing the margin call. The room was so quiet I could hear the harsh, raspy intake of his breath. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. The paper shook in his hands. He looked up at Julian. His expression was no longer one of pride. It was pure, unadulterated rage. "You leveraged the estate," Charles whispered, his voice a dangerous low rumble. "You used our family home as cross-collateral for your trading account." Julian stepped back, his confident facade shattering. He held up his hands, attempting to pacify my father. "Charles, it is just a temporary market fluctuation," Julian stammered, his voice pitching higher with fear. "The bank requires a localized guarantor for offshore margin accounts. I needed the liquidity to bridge the gap before the lithium rights clear. The market shifted against my position, but I can fix it." "You put my house on the line," Charles roared, throwing the portfolio onto the spilled food. $4 million, Julian. You owe them $4 million by tomorrow, or they will seize the property. We will be living on the street. Chloe had been sitting frozen, trying to process the financial terminology. When she heard the number, her eyes widened. She stared at the man she was supposed to marry. Her dream of endless wealth and high society status was evaporating right in front of her eyes. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "Where is my wedding fund?" Chloe shrieked. Her voice was shrill, echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "You told me the Vanguard bonus is cleared. You told me we were buying the penthouse in Tribeca. Where is the money, Julian?" Julian glared at her, the mask of the loving fiancé falling away. "There is no penthouse, Chloe," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "The money is tied up in the margin deficit. I had to divert the wedding fund to cover the initial margin call last week. I thought the market would rebound." Chloe lost her mind. The fragile, sweet facade she projected to the world vanished, replacing her with a feral, frantic animal. She lunged across the dining table, ignoring the expensive china and the lit candles. Her hands curled into claws. She grabbed the lapels of Julian's custom Italian suit, tearing at the fabric. "You stole from me," she screamed, pulling him back and forth. "You lied to me. I will not be poor. Give me my money back right now." Julian tried to pry her fingers off his jacket. "Chloe, let go," he demanded, struggling to maintain his balance. She refused to release him, striking his chest with her fists. The charming, successful groom disappeared. Cornered and desperate, Julian retaliated. He shoved Chloe backward with forceful momentum. Chloe stumbled, her high heels twisting on the expensive Persian rug. She fell hard, crashing into the heavy wooden credenza near the wall. A silver serving tray clattered to the ground. Evelyn shrieked, rushing to the side of her golden child. She knelt on the floor, cradling Chloe and glaring at Julian with lethal intent. "You are a monster," Evelyn hissed, her face twisted in disgust. "We welcomed you into this family. We gave you our blessing." Julian let out a bitter, hollow laugh. "Do not play the victim, Evelyn," he fired back, pointing a shaking finger at my father. "You are all complicit in this. Charles gave me falsified financial statements to help me secure the leverage from the bank. You inflated your net worth to make yourselves look like prime investors. You wanted the social status just as much as I did. You knew I was bending the rules to secure the capital. Charles stepped forward, his fists clenched at his sides. I will ruin you, he threatened, his voice shaking with fury. I will call my lawyers. I will have you arrested for fraud. If I go down, I am taking this entire family with me, Julian countered, refusing to back down. The bank does not care about your excuses, Charles. They care about the collateral. If I do not wire $4 million by tomorrow night, they will foreclose on this house. They will freeze your remaining assets. You will be penniless. The reality of the situation suffocated the room. My family had built a kingdom on lies and deceit. Now the walls were caving in, and they were tearing each other apart trying to find an exit. They were trapped in a burning building, and they were fighting over who started the fire instead of looking for a way out. I sat quietly in my chair observing the carnage. I did not intervene. I did not offer a single word of comfort. I was a spectator watching the inevitable consequence of unchecked greed. Julian was hyperventilating. His eyes darted around the dining room searching for a lifeline. He needed liquid cash immediately. He needed an untraceable revenue stream to satisfy the international bank and buy himself enough time to flee the country. His frantic gaze swept across the table and landed on the piece of paper resting near my wine glass, the power of attorney document. The ink on my signature was barely dry. To Julian, that document represented a fresh, untapped reservoir of wealth. He believed I had hidden savings in a valuable studio apartment. He assumed he could drain my life savings to cover a fraction of his debt and buy himself a plane ticket out of the jurisdiction. He lunged across the table, knocking over a crystal water pitcher. The cold liquid spilled across the polished mahogany, soaking into the linen tablecloth. He did not care. He snatched the document, holding it against his chest like a shield. I have this, Julian declared, his breathing ragged and erratic. I hold the legal authority over her accounts. I will liquidate her apartment tomorrow morning. I will drain her savings. I will cash out her retirement fund. It will not cover the $4 million, but it will bridge the gap. It will buy us enough time to restructure the debt. He was openly confessing to his plan to rob me blind. He was declaring his intention to leave me destitute to save his own skin. I looked at my parents, expecting them to intervene. I waited to see if they possessed a single shred of parental decency. I waited to see if they would stop a desperate fraudster from stealing their eldest daughter's life savings. Charles and Evelyn remained silent. They looked at the document in Julian's hand, and then they looked away. They were perfectly willing to let him destroy my financial future if it meant there was a slight chance they could save their precious mansion. They chose their fake wealth over my survival without a second thought. Their silence was the final confirmation I needed. I owed them nothing. I picked up my linen napkin and gracefully wiped the corners of my mouth. I placed the napkin neatly beside my plate. I stood up, smoothing the silk fabric of my dress. I did not raise my voice. I did not display an ounce of fear. I looked at Julian. Do what you have to do, Julian, I said, my voice soft and even. I hope it saves you. Julian did not waste another second. He turned on his heel and sprinted out of the dining room, clutching the power of attorney document. The heavy front door slammed shut, echoing through the silent foyer. A moment later, the roar of his luxury car engine tore through the quiet suburban night. Tires screeched against the pavement as he sped away from the estate. He was rushing to his Vanguard Capital office. He intended to use his executive terminal to access the global banking network. He planned to input the legal authorization codes and transfer every dime I owned into his offshore accounts. He felt triumphant. He thought he had outsmarted everyone and secured his escape route. He was entirely oblivious to the lethal digital snare I had waiting for him. I had anticipated this exact scenario. I knew his desperation would force him to act recklessly. When I signed that document, I did not give him the keys to my kingdom. I handed him a digital mirror. The localized honeypot account linked to my social security number was guarded by a sophisticated cybersecurity architecture. It was programmed with a strict reverse routing protocol. The moment Julian inputted that specific power of attorney authorization into the banking portal, my system would recognize the hostile intrusion. It would not grant him access to my funds. Instead, the protocol would trace the intrusion directly back to his executive credentials. Once verified, the system would instantly trigger a predetermined countermeasure. It would execute a permanent administrative freeze on every single personal and corporate asset registered in his name. It would lock his trading accounts, disable his credit cards, and block his passport authorization. I was racing through the city streets believing he was about to steal my life. He had no idea he was rushing to lock the final padlock on his own inevitable prison cell. The midnight air in the financial district felt unusually stagnant as Julian drove his luxury vehicle toward the towering headquarters of Vanguard Capital. The streets were deserted, offering a deceptive sense of calm to a man whose entire existence was currently collapsing. He bypassed the underground parking attendant with a curt nod, rushing toward the private executive elevators. His tailored suit was rumpled and his breathing remained shallow and erratic. He clutched the signed power of attorney document in his hand, like a drowning sailor clinging to a life raft. He truly believed the piece of paper I had signed at the dining table held the power to extract enough liquidity to save him from the International Investment Bank margin call. He envisioned draining my savings, liquidating my assets, and satisfying his offshore creditors before the morning sun broke over the skyline, miles away from the Vanguard skyscraper. I sat in the dim glow of my private command center alongside Marcus. My brother-in-law leaned back in an ergonomic leather chair, his dark eyes fixed on the array of high-definition monitors mounted to the wall. As a senior investigative counsel for the Securities and Exchange Commission, Marcus treated financial crime scenes like surgical theaters. He thrived in the quiet moments before the trap snapped shut. We were not relying on guesswork or assumptions, thanks to the microscopic radio frequency mesh hidden inside the napkin. Marcus had handed Julian earlier that evening. We possessed a direct, uninterrupted mirror of his mobile device in any local network he connected to. When Julian swiped his security badge to enter the Vanguard Capital trading floor, a green notification illuminated our primary monitor. We watched the live feed of his computer terminal boot up. The interface displayed the Vanguard corporate logo, followed by a secure login prompt. Julian typed his credentials with frantic, unsteady keystrokes. We could almost feel his desperation radiating through the digital connection. He bypassed the standard client portfolios and navigated directly to the global asset management portal. He initiated a search query using my full legal name and social security number, attempting to locate the accounts he assumed were ripe for the taking. The system located the localized honeypot ledger I had carefully prepared. Julian stared at the screen, likely expecting to see a moderate checking account and a small mutual fund. He planned to use the power of attorney to leverage those assets into a short-term, high-yield loan. He quickly scanned the document into his desktop scanner, uploading the PDF file to the Vanguard internal authorization system. He typed in the transfer command requesting an immediate interbank wire of $4 million to satisfy his offshore margin deficit. He attached the scanned document as the legal justification for the uncharacteristic movement of funds. He hit the execute key. In his mind, the crisis was averted. He was merely waiting for the automated compliance software to verify the document and release the capital. Inside the command center, Marcus folded his hands, observing the data packet hit the verification gateway. Julian had made a catastrophic assumption regarding corporate security protocols. He thought a simple piece of paper would bypass modern banking algorithms. The Vanguard system initiated a routine biometric and cryptographic scan of the uploaded contract, comparing the signature on the page against historical data points. The software analyzed the angle of the capital letters, the pressure mapping of the ink, and the fluid dynamics of the cursive script. The system detected the duress signature I had meticulously crafted at the dinner table. The altered curves and disconnected loops triggered an immediate anomaly warning. On Julian's monitor, a stark red error message populated the center of the screen: authorization denied. Signature mismatch detected. Manual verification required. Through the mirrored audio feed, we heard the sound of Julian slamming his fist against his mahogany desk. A stream of panicked curses echoed in the empty Vanguard office. The error message meant the transfer was locked. The bank would require me to physically walk into a branch and verbally confirm the transaction before releasing a single dollar. Julian did not have the luxury of time. The margin call demanded payment within 24 hours, and my parents' estate would be seized if he failed. He was staring down the barrel of total financial ruin and public disgrace. The Wall Street prodigy was backed into a corner with no legal exit. When a cornered predator realizes the escape route is blocked, they do not surrender. They escalate. We watched Julian's cursor hover erratically over the screen. He opened a new tab, accessing a restricted directory within the Vanguard server. He navigated to a specialized software suite designed for corporate identity rendering. It was an artificial intelligence program utilized by marketing departments to generate vector graphics and replicate digital signatures for mass email campaigns. "What is he doing?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on the monitor. Marcus leaned forward, his posture tightening with intense predatory focus. "He is crossing the Rubicon Victoria. He realizes the physical document failed the compliance check. He is preparing to bypass the human element entirely. He is booting up an artificial intelligence rendering tool to manufacture a flawless digital copy of your signature and personal electronic seal. Julian minimized the failed transfer window. He pulled up a public regulatory filing from 3 years ago, an old document containing my genuine verified signature. He fed the clean image into the artificial intelligence software. He instructed the program to analyze the authentic script and generate a dynamic vector file. The software processed the request, smoothing out the jagged edges and matching the exact pressure points of my true handwriting. He then generated a fake digital notary seal, inputting a random license number to bypass the secondary compliance check. He was no longer acting as an opportunistic thief trying to exploit a vulnerable family member. He was meticulously manufacturing fraudulent legal instruments. Julian attached the newly minted artificial intelligence-generated signature to a blank digital transfer authorization form. He uploaded the forged document back into the Vanguard clearing system, overriding the previous error code. He typed the $4 million transfer request a second time. Marcus reached out and touched the edge of our monitor, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register. Do you realize what he just did by employing artificial intelligence to forge an electronic signature and transmitting that fraudulent data across banking networks to steal assets? He just graduated from civil mismanagement to a severe federal felony. That specific action violates the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. It constitutes federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. We just secured a guaranteed indictment with a mandatory minimum sentence. He handed us the entire case. I watched the screen as Julian's cursor hovered over the final submission button. His entire future rested on the next click. He pressed the mouse. The Vanguard portal displayed a loading icon, a small spinning circle that represented the difference between his survival and his incarceration. The system processed the new flawless signature. The artificial intelligence forgery passed the automated compliance check without triggering a single warning. The screen flashed a bright, undeniable green, transfer successful, $4 million dispatched. We heard a long, ragged exhale through the audio feed. Julian collapsed back into his office chair, the leather creaking under his shifting weight. The sound of his rapid heartbeat seemed to slow down. He believed he had won. He thought he had outsmarted the banking system, manipulated my family, and secured the capital necessary to save his own skin. He envisioned the International Investment Bank receiving the funds, clearing his margin deficit, and allowing him to maintain his lavish facade. He had no idea that the money never reached his creditors. When I established the honeypot account, I did not merely set up a monitoring system. I worked with Marcus to implement a localized routing intercept. The moment the Vanguard system authorized the $4 million withdrawal, the federal trap activated. The routing numbers Julian had provided for his offshore margin account were instantly scrambled by our invisible architecture. The capital did not travel to the Cayman Islands or Switzerland. It was forcibly diverted straight into a frozen holding account managed by the Department of Justice. The government now possessed the $4 million as physical evidence of his cybercrime. On Julian's monitor, the green success message slowly began to glitch. The screen flickered, shifting from bright green to a stark, unforgiving gray. A terminal window popped up, overriding his desktop controls. Julian tried to move his mouse, but the cursor was frozen. He hammered the escape key, attempting to close the browser, but the hardware refused to respond. The Vanguard Capital cybersecurity mainframe, detecting the intercept and the federal lockdown, automatically initiated a quarantine protocol. Julian's internet protocol address was deadlocked. The network recognized his terminal as the source of a massive critical breach. His computer screen went entirely black, displaying a single line of white text stating that the workstation had been administratively disabled due to severe fraudulent activity. Julian was sitting in the dark, staring at a dead screen, his access permanently severed, and his stolen money resting safely in a federal vault. The execution phase had officially commenced. The morning sun breached the Manhattan skyline, casting long, sharp shadows across our private command center. Marcus reviewed the quarantine logs on the primary terminal. The Department of Justice held the $4 million securely in a frozen vault. Julian was trapped in a digital cage of his own making, locked out of the Vanguard Capital servers, and unable to satisfy his offshore margin call. But financial freezes operate like a spreading infection, hitting the weakest extremities first. The initial symptom of their impending ruin manifested just before noon. My secure phone vibrated on the glass desk, displaying Chloe's contact information. I knew exactly where she was scheduled to be this morning. She had booked an exclusive VIP suite at a premier bridal boutique on Fifth Avenue. It was an appointment reserved for clients willing to drop six figures on imported lace and custom tailoring. Chloe lived for these precise moments, surrounded by fawning sales associates serving champagne while she paraded in front of floor-to-ceiling mirrors.